thing about the good thing about doing this as an event instead of as just starting is that people already have questions. So I can get right into it. It's Wednesday. Why does God allow evil, suffering, and bad things to happen? So we got a themed Ask Me Anything, which I'm still going to try to answer all the questions I can. But if it's about that, I'm extra going to try to answer them. I actually have questions already lined up about that. Shazam Bo said, "Oh, there's a couple. I'm interested to hear about the idea of integrating our shadow from a Swedenborgian perspective. I'm also wondering how or if prayer by the living can help those who have already died and may be suffering in the afterlife." And then Mary Wolf right after that says, "Is there suffering in the afterlife?" So, integrating the shadow from a Swedenborgian perspective. So, the integrating that goes down is that you're supposed to get things ordered correctly. So Swedenborg isn't trying to say that you are going to get rid of everything negative in yourself. You can't do that. It's impossible. Nobody can do that. The goal is to have the bad stuff do what the good stuff tells it to do. So both spiritually, he says that if you make the choice to enter the state that's called heaven, where you put what's good and true at the center, that's the most important thing in your life. That's what you follow. That's what you aspire to act like. Then what's evil and false gets pushed outward and tends downward, which means we're not engaging with it. We're not following it. But also, he talks about these three categories of love or of primary motivation. He says that there's love of self and love of the world and love of usefulness. And that love of usefulness is supposed to be up on top. So love of doing kind things for other people is supposed to be what's on top. And if it's on top and then love of the world, which is love of sensory gratification, is in the middle, and then love of self, which is your own reputation and power, is on the bottom, then it's all good. Then you can have your ego, but your ego is firmly in service of what's good and true. So there's some integration. About suffering in the afterlife. Yeah, there is. I mean, if we're talking about, does anybody experience unpleasant things? Yes, and this is a great lead-in for why does God allow evil, suffering, and bad things to happen? It's only when suffering is the only thing that can accomplish what needs to happen. I think with each of us, if we're generally pretty trying to be good, even then there are times when we have to get into unpleasant, uncomfortable states to really bring this idea that we need God's help to life, to really understand that the nature of suffering itself, and that opens us up more to understand why we should be helping other people out of it. These taken together form what Swedenborg calls spiritual crises, and those are essential to spiritual growth. But if you go farther into people who are not interested in spiritual growth and are in fact enchanted by the joy that doing harmful things to other people gives them, and they started to devote their life to it, there are times when people don't listen to anything else than the threat of suffering. That's the only way you can get somebody to stop trying to hurt and maim people. So in the afterlife, there's very controlled suffering, but it is there if it can serve the purpose of getting people to not dive deeper into particular evils or not harm other people through those evils. All right. Right? So, next one. Bill Diaz says, shouldn't the title be, Why Does God Create Evil? In Isaiah 45:7, in the King James Version reads, I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. Seems pretty direct. Swedenborg asserts that the entire Bible is correspondential. So it is like it says, Jesus in parables spake he not, that everything that's said has a deeper layers of meaning to it, and that the outermost layer in which the words are just like you got the parable of the sower, which on the outermost level, there's somebody who threw seeds into the ground. But Jesus says it's not actually about that, is it? It's about the Lord scattering the word. So on the outermost, there's an outermost level to the entire Bible, and in there, it's written according to appearances. So just like you see, it looks like the sun moves in the sky, but doesn't. The earth moves around the sun. So it is that it can seem like, especially when, as I talked about before, we are devoting ourselves to something harmful, and God is blocking us from that, or allowing us to suffer the repercussions of that. It seems to us like God is the source of evil, but Swedenborg is very adamant that it's not the case, that there's a lot of times in the Bible where God is condemning people and wanting to kill them, sending angels to kill people, and vowing to wipe people off the face of the earth, saying that he burns with anger. Swedenborg asserts that is actually the nature of hell rather than the nature of God, that God doesn't do anything but love, because God is divine love. But yet, it can seem to us when we bring evils on ourselves by acting against the divine design, like God is doing it. But he says it's just like the sun does not create darkness, nor does it create cold. Darkness and cold are a lack of those things, that God does not create evil. We're actually filming a really in-depth program about this right now, so glad you asked, and watch for that to come out soon. Okay. Let's see what else we got. Question. Shows like Long Island Medium show hosts communicating with spirits. Is this real? Can we really get messages from deceased people in the afterlife? Also, is this something allowed by God? I've seen Long Island Medium, maybe an episode or something. I don't know about any individual. I think it can happen. Can you talk to spirits? Swedenborg was doing it, and he said that this is not some special ability that only he and a couple prophets have. He says this is something that can happen to anyone under the right conditions. He says that people who spend a lot of time alone and a lot of time in their imaginations, spirits can just come in and start talking to them. They can sometimes hear it. But he says that that's usually, it can be dangerous. So it depends on what kind of spiritual company you attract and what you're up to. So it's something that's allowed by God. I think it's something that probably happens very positively in a lot of cases. It happened to Swedenborg very positively. He has some cautions against it. We actually did a show. I got to search out some shows for everybody. This first one I'm going to post in the chat, and it's called, Is It Safe to Talk to Spirits? I'll put a Swedenborg in there. How fast can I type? Yes. Well, did I recently give this one to all of you? Okay. So here's a chat. This is called, Is It Safe to Talk to Spirits? That's a little more in depth about the complexity of that question, the answer to that question from a Swedenborgian perspective. So I think that there's probably plenty of people who are getting really good reads. There are probably some people that are making it up, and some people that are somewhere in between who are sort of getting the message, and there's some people who are being tricked. There's probably all of the case, but certainly seems like it can happen. And Swedenborg never says God stops it. Okay. What's another question? Well, okay. Come on now. God gave us free will. Hi, Cardisan community. Hi, San. John's Journey said, how do we have free will if we can't choose to disappear? Yeah, like you're in life and it's not going anywhere. The free will that Swedenborg describes is fundamentally a freedom to pursue what's enjoyable for us. So he usually casts it in terms of a freedom to do good or a freedom to do evil. And freedom is characterized by what we enjoy. We talk about freedom as being able to do anything, but it's really do anything that we want. That's where we really notice when our freedom is restricted, when we can't do something that we want to do. So the freedom that's always maintained by God is that we are always free to either enjoy good or enjoy evil, and to intend good or intend evil based on what we want to do. It doesn't though seem like we don't always just have total freedom of outcome. Like you're saying, we didn't, I don't know if we chose to be alive or not, and we can't just say, well, never mind, I never existed in the first place. And there's also stacked right beside that, if we don't have enough money to fly around the world, we don't have the freedom to go do that. A lot of people don't have freedom from the things that are going on in their own mind. And I would hope that it's because, for example, the freedom to disappear isn't given to us because we don't really have the perspective to make that choice. Because there's been plenty of times in my life when I've felt like, I can't take this anymore. This whole life thing, I didn't sign up for this. This is really painful and weird. I didn't want this. It's why you don't give somebody a pet for Christmas, because it's like, wait, I didn't want to have to take care of this animal. It's like with life, it's this gift that has all kinds of strings attached, and it can be very painful at times. But what I'm convinced of is that, on balance, overall, I'm very lucky to be alive. That we all are, given what God is doing for us and where life will end up. So I think that it's probably, you can't give us the keys to turn ourselves off and on because we're not thinking right yet. That we'll understand as time goes on, as we get into the afterlife, how we really actually do want to be alive. We can't quite make that decision. Colin Vickers says, question, can you help me understand the concept of God doing things through us as if from ourselves, except we still have free will? Yeah, that'd be nice to understand that. I was just talking to a guy named Dr. Peter King, who's a retired professor in the UK, and he's written this paper about that very thing that you're talking about. Well, a simple way to think about it is God is, ability itself is divine. To be able to have the ability to do anything from yourself, there's only one being that possesses that, which is God. We think of it because we're so used to having it around. It's like, oh yeah, everybody can do things, but we don't realize how hard it is to make. The first analogy that's popping up into my mind is like a cell phone. We sort of think, everybody's got a cell phone. They're easy to get. But the fact is, there's only a few factories in the world that can make something that's that complicated. If you just were on an island, you could never assemble that or make that. So it is with the ability to act. It can only come out of God. It's a divine thing. But we can accept those actions or reject them, though. And I don't think it's like, well, God is trying to give you, going to the grocery store, the steps to walk there, and you are either taking it or rejecting that as a big unit. I think it's much more little building block-y than that. But in general, God has the ability to do things, particularly to do what is good. And that can only happen through us if the free will is us saying, yes, I want to accept that and act on it as if it's my own. And saying, if this was just originating in me, I would do the same thing. And I'm doing it with part of me, it's seeming like it, that appearance I was talking about before. It seems like I'm doing this on my own. That is the partnership. Just God wanting to do it through us by himself isn't anything, and just us trying to do something from ourselves isn't anything. It's when the two get together. But they only get together if we say, okay, come on in. A cube says, and then another question. If there are two evil spirits plus good, so 4 spirits, do these spirits represent good in general and evil in general? Or is it particular evils hereditary, perhaps? Yeah, so I was talking about before. Swedenborg says that there are constantly with you at least 2 evil spirits and 2 angels, because you have a will and an intellect, so a thought receiver and a feeling receiver, and you need an equilibrium between heaven and hell for those. So you have 1 angel and 1 evil spirit in the mind, and 1 angel and 1 evil spirit in the heart, and the opposing forces that creates equilibrium. Is that just 1 evil spirit or 1 angel, or is it a representative? So every angel is connected to all of heaven, and every evil spirit is connected to all of hell. Swedenborg says every angel is like a center of heaven, and there's a sharing of each with all the others, and all the others with each. He doesn't explicitly say that in hell, but he does talk about, this is back to, I guess, Colin's question, when he was saying, how do we, talking about God doing good things through us. Swedenborg asserts that because all of hell is interconnected like that, that's why it's impossible for us to resist evil without God's power coming through us. Because if you're trying to resist one evil, it's actually like you're trying to resist all of hell, because they all, like, it's the water column it's sitting on you with all of that pressure. So every angel and every evil spirit is in some ways a representative of the whole. Everyone does have their own characteristics, so they represent the whole differently, which I guess would mean there are certain parts of it that they display more fully and openly, or there's parts of that are more immediate. Just like each person is receiving God's life, but we express it all in different ways and receive parts of it. I guess that would be a lot like, you've got, this is an object and white light is hitting it, but white light that contains all the colors in it is hitting it. Different parts of this absorb different parts of the light and reflect different parts of the light. So that's why you get variation in this, even though the same light is going into that object. So I do think that, I don't know if it's the heredity that we have, the tendency towards particular evil things that Swedenborg says we all have, and I guess correspondingly some aptitude towards good things as well, although a lot of that we gain through the exercise of our free will to assimilate things that come to us that are good and true. We do seem to have tendencies to certain evils. What I don't know is if the tendencies are in the spirits that we attract, or if it's part of the way that our spirit is structured, and so evil and good come through us in those particular ones. I think it's probably the former, because Swedenborg says we're all associated with spirits who are like ourselves. So if we have particular evils that we are inclined to, I think that would mean our associate spirits and even our spirit is located in the community where that evil is practiced, or where that good is practiced. All right, Erica, hey, glad you made it. Tenacious says, I have so much love for people. That's awesome. Love is a great, great thing. Okay. All right. Just had the old questions all scroll down. I'm going back up. Noble Roman says, I've often felt God gets his kicks by our suffering. And what can you do since he made us? We're actually his property. Yeah, it can definitely feel like that. I've had many an angry rant at God saying, essentially, like, why'd you make this whole thing? What are you doing? Are you laughing at me? And I get mad when I feel like something is mocking me, because I've had, as everyone has had, a lot of suffering in life. When little things, especially things that I think are kind of silly, go wrong, Like let's say that right now I was trying to not spill my water and like it started to tip and I grabbed it with my hand and grabbed it and it flipped and flipped a few times before it fell and wrecked something, I would get mad. Like just as a reaction because I feel like, hey, this is serious. You can't make fun of me. You can't get your kicks out of my suffering. I know that I don't think God's really doing that, but it can feel like that. Because to get kicks out of our suffering, that's hell. To enjoy the suffering of others, that's hell. That's the opposite of God. God is love. And to be property in the sense of, this is my opinion, Noble Roman, that I'm basing off of Swedenborg, which is why I don't think God gets his kicks out of our suffering. Because to say that, oh, you're my property, I made you so that I can do anything I want with you, that is the way hell thinks of ruling people. That hell, which is the love of ruling over others, thinks everyone else exists for my sake. So when we have hell inside of us, we think everybody else exists for my sake. So if I enjoy making fun of them or watching them squirm, then I'm going to do it, and that's fun, and that's because they exist for my sake. God says, I exist for everyone else's sake. So the ruling that I'm doing, God rules the universe, and what that means is it is my responsibility and deepest desire to give everyone everything that's mine, and everything that's mine in God's case is goodness. So all happiness, all truth. So this is that appearance. Noble Roman is talking about that appearance where, just like in the Bible, it seems like God is just absent and is laughing and we're suffering and he couldn't care less, when actually God is the opposite of that, and it's hell that is enjoying our suffering and causing it. Okay. Richard Stevens, so from what you mentioned, there is segregation in the spiritual world according to the level of love we have or not. There is definitely what I could call striation. Like there are levels of being, and the levels of being correspond to the states of openness or closedness of the levels of your mind. There are very distinctly levels in the spiritual mind, and they open one at a time. Like you could look through a spiritual microscope and see this somehow, and they open as we open to what's good and true, and they close as we open to what's evil and false. Think of it like the different layers in the ocean, where you have these different zones of pressure, different zones of temperature, different zones of light. If you took a bottom-dwelling dogfish or like a vampire octopus, or those giant copepods, the things that live way down there, if you took one and just brought it up to the surface, it would die. Because it cannot, even though we think of the surface as, the pressure's better, it's nice here. To them, they need that pressure to be in their form. They need that cold and that darkness to live in their habitat. Whereas if you take something that lives on the surface and pull it down to the Mariana Trench, it'll crush inward. So it is that's the nature of the spiritual separations that happen, is that there are different levels of consciousness caused by these different levels of opening the mind. And if you had the first level of your mind opened and tried to go into the heaven where the second level of the mind is open, you would be profoundly uncomfortable there. Likewise, if you are in hell and you go up into a level of heaven, you don't feel good at all. You feel terrible. Swedenborg describes people who are in that hell, which is that love of the opposite love to God's, where you love other people's suffering and you love to rule over them. When they get up into the atmosphere of mutual love that surrounds God, it's miserable for them, and they get out of there as quickly as they can. All right. Wildman82, hello. Good to see you. Happy Wednesday, Tina. Lisa Lee says, in the spirit world, is our relationship to our parents, father, mother, child, like, or more peer to peer? Will we see them as our parents still? Yeah, what a good question. I've definitely had times when I felt like I was wishing it'd be fun to be a little kid again with my parents as parents. Wouldn't that be fun to do that again? Maybe. What I mean is maybe you end up with the same relationship there, because Swedenborg talks about things that are analogous to familial relationships in communities in heaven. So he says, just like here you have parents and cousins and spouses and whatever else you have, little children and brothers and sisters. There are those relationships in heaven, but it's not necessarily with your biological relatives. It is with whoever fills that role for you based on who they really are deep down and who you really are deep down. Because you are a particular kind of love and wisdom, so you have your own particular place in heaven, and somebody else might be like a sister version of that to you, right? And there's also your soulmate or conjugal partner, your spiritual spouse, which is like the other part, the other other half to the angel that you're going to be. So all these, the things that we are have these relationships to each other, and so that ends up feeling just like and being just like spiritual relationships like that. It can happen that actually they're the same as they were on earth. Swedenborg talks about in the most ancient church. People from that era, this is way back when humanity was pretty innocent and people lived together without the love of power. It's sort of a bygone era of ideal human occupation or cohabitation that lived thousands of years ago. He doesn't specify when, but early in this planet, he says that they're in heaven, living family by family, just like they used to. So I think it can be, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. And I think some people say that with, I still love my mom and dad. I still want to have a relationship like that with them. And other people think, I had a hard time with my mom and dad. I don't want to always have to be around them eternally. So it could be that you could be in a spiritual community where your biological parents are there, but they're more like peers. It could be that, I think it could be any one of those. Did that clear anything up? I hope so. Tenacious says, I don't know how to put what I want to ask into a question that makes sense. Yeah, it's tough. Well, you should try putting answers in a way that makes sense. Yeah. I'm just saying it's hard for me to answer these questions in any way that is any good. Okay, let's see. Let's go back up to where my... man. Did Swedenborg believe we're placed in certain situations as spiritual tests? I don't think so. There are spiritual trials that we go into, which are when heaven and hell start to battle inside of us to try to see, is good or evil going to be in charge inside of you? And you can feel that as painful distress. It can sometimes be accompanied by physical challenges, health challenges. He'll definitely describe that. He doesn't really ever describe a situation. Like, for example, I'm right now going to be attacked by a person, or I'm put into a weird work situation as a test. Everything is bent towards spiritual growth, but he doesn't describe that external situations. It's always like what's going on in you internally. Okay. Oh, Tina Hansen says, can we lend our angels to someone who seems overcome by the evils? That's a very angelic thought. Swedenborg says that angels in the highest heaven would gladly trade places with anybody in hell if those people in hell wanted to, just so that they could the people in hell could have the same happiness that the angels have. That is, I don't know if you can send yours. Ask him, but I didn't talk about that. AJ says, who is Swedenborg to you? I don't know. Swedenborg is the best spiritual explainer of things that I know of. I don't know much. I don't know if the guy, obviously I've never met him. I don't know too much what he was like to hang out with or around. I just really know the books. And in there, it's like, Swedenborg has provided me a really handy tool with which to connect to God. Tenacious said, I feel so stupid when I reflect on getting mad at dropping things or the kids making a mess. It doesn't matter. I have to learn not to act off my emotions. It's hard, though. It's hard. It's hard to not have things tip you off or set you off, I should be saying. Wondering Heights says, if I'm mad, I have to let it out. Why keep it in? I think you got to let it out, but in the ways where you're not causing harm to yourself or other people. Hey, Bojan. Good to see you here. Pan BV Nice says, you make several assumptions, i.e., you assume that God exists. You assume God is omniscient and omnipotent. God is good. Suggestion, please stop the rant and offer a single proof. What would be a proof? Like, would you say, like, here I'm holding God in my hands, so this proves that God is those things. This is what I think. The only instrument that can sense the existence of God is the human will and intellect. So there's plenty of people who have direct experience or are very convinced that this can observe God. We're like the Hubble telescope, the only one that can see God. So that I can't stop and say, I want to prove to you that God exists, because no matter what you say, it can always be explained as this natural phenomenon. But what we're doing here is offering out these ideas, and then you take them into your mind and see if that can focus your telescope, so you come to a place where does God exist or does God not? So I've got to keep doing the rant. I mean, that's what this whole thing is about. It's a whole different conversation too. Like let's break down and see if we can debate whether God exists. It's very different than we're going to try to dig into this question. You can't have both conversations at once. It would be fun to see like how much can you try to make a hard case that God, you have to believe that God exists because look at these numbers. But that's not, we can't do that here, because then we couldn't get deep into anything, because we would have to stop and try to do that. But still, I mean, Swedenborg, I'm not just trying to say what Swedenborg says, but Swedenborg says that if you're not open to it, it's very hard. You're not going to be, it's not even good for you to be somehow convinced, like forced to believe that it happened, because that's not the same as that destroys the freedom. It's only into that freedom that you can really get a living picture of what God is. Minimal says, is God detangling each person by putting them in specific situations so that they can ultimately learn and be free from evil? I think so. I don't know if it's like by putting them in specific situations or I don't know if God picks you up and puts you in it, but in general, the situations that we're in, God will use them to ultimately learn and be free from evil. I think that's well said. The Cube says, what if someone feels they do not deserve heaven and heaven is pleasurable? I mean, I imagine not in a hedonistic and self-serving way. If someone feels they don't deserve heaven, well, that's fine. Swedenborg didn't think he deserved heaven. He says, actually, there's a part of charity which thinks, this is too good. This is too good for me. God's going to give it to you anyway, and knows how to give it to you in a way that you will enjoy it. Heaven is not the same for anyone. There's no such thing as two people that have the same experience of heaven. So if you have a picture of heaven where you might think, well, there's sort of two ways. You might have a picture of heaven where you think, oh, that's kind of boring. I don't want to do that. Or that's too many people around. God is going to give you the heaven that works for you. And if you feel like I don't deserve it, like I'm too bad of a person, all good is from God. All good is from God. It's not a race. Like heaven is not a reward. Heaven is, and we can't help having bad in us. I mean, we're fallible, we're vulnerable human beings. Evil is always pressing in, trying to dupe us in, and God is always trying to save us. There's none of the you deserve it or you don't. Everyone deserves heaven. Just think about it, because a person is a person. They're fundamentally, God is in love with them and trying to get them to be happy, because that's what anything conscious deserves, no matter how twisted or far away they've gotten from being good. Kimana says, how do you break free from a certain evil when it feels like the whole of hell is connected to you through that evil? Yeah, it just keeps coming back. I thought I got done with this already. Or this just coming over me. How am I going to... It's tough. Yeah, that's why it's about turning to God. And the way that you do that is examine yourself. So look at what you enjoy and what goals you're aiming for. And if you can notice something, and Swedenborg says it's good to start with one thing that you notice, this is against my understanding of what the right thing to do is, or I don't think this is good. I don't want to be like this. I think that's harmful. I think that's from hell. Then once or twice in a month, when that comes up, that opportunity to take pleasure in doing whatever's bad, if you say, I'm not going to do this, and you ask God for the power to not do that, he says that's enough to get you started. He says do that once or twice a month and you'll notice a change. I know that might not help when you're really in the thick of it, but I do take comfort in that. Swedenborg has a whole chapter in Heaven and Hell. It says it's not as hard, the title of it is, it's not as hard to lead a heaven-bound life as people think it is. Oh, new questions came in. Okay. Where am I? Got to find myself. Come on now. I'm back. Glad you're enjoying it, Mary. Tenacious T says, how did E-Man feel about reincarnation? E-Man! We did a show called Do We Reincarnate? Just search Swedenborg, Do We Reincarnate on YouTube. So he doesn't think that you come back in a physical body. Your spirit isn't able to re-enter physical organisms. But so it's kind of like the womb to the rest of your life. You're in the womb one time, and that provides the platform from which you live your whole life. But then once you're born and you're out, and there's a ton of growth that's happening there. He says that's like we live once in the physical world. Then you get to the spiritual world, and there you do a lot of this sort of cyclical growth. There are times when you sort of forget who you were, but you're always still you, because and this came up didn't this just come up in our Q&A show on Monday? The you that you are is particularly needed, and the characteristics that you have you have to be there, because that's how you be part of the grand human being. But check out our show, Do We Reincarnate, on this channel, to get more about that. If a child, Tenacious ITC says, if a child passes away very young, will that child grow up in heaven? Like if the child was 5, will it grow to be an adult? Yes. Children in heaven grow because their minds grow. As your mind grows, your spiritual body grows. And he says, yep, they get up to the flower of youth, or like young adulthood, and then that's where they stay. And the rest of us who are old get back to young adulthood, because that form is the form of goodness and truth and love and wisdom at their peak. So he says to grow old in heaven is to grow young. And the highest angels even appear like little children. sometimes. They're not really genuinely little kids, but that's how they appear a lot of the time because of the innocence that's around them. Kathy V says, why can't we learn in heaven instead of having to come to earth to do so? Swedenborg talked to some people who had died really young, and they had never known earth, and they had learned everything they learned in heaven, and they had some good wisdom, but there was a lot that they didn't know. We talk here about why does God allow evil, suffering, and bad things to happen? Because they had no experience with evil. It's like if your immune system has never encountered a virus, let's say, you don't have any defenses to that, and you don't know how to protect from it. So the whole of heaven cannot be made out of people who never had a physical life. Everybody has to at least have some teeny little bit of existence physically, because that literally provides some kind of substantial platform for your spirit. But the lives we live here, even though they're painful, are extremely valuable, because this is the area, the place that's the most effective, I think, in removing evils from us through these experiences we were talking about before. We're getting near the end of the time, everybody. Let's see. M. Evil Sizer, what's up, Matt? It says, can you expand on you are your own type of love and wisdom? Love is our life. Love is our life. What your purpose is, the thing that you want the most, the thing that you would leave everything else for, whatever that is. We sort of starts out with it being our own honor, reputation, that our own self-image is what we want. That doing well is the thing we want above everything. That makes us who we are, and there's a particular way we can kind of long for ourselves initially, but then we're trying to migrate to this love of useful service. That's what everything God is putting us through in life, all the suffering and things we go through, is ultimately to try to make it so that we end up caring about helping people and loving to do what's good and true. And everybody has a different desire to make the world a better place in a different particular way. And that desire pulls to it a way of life and a set of knowledge, which you would call the wisdom, and marries itself to them so that you end up with a particular person who has sort of your own drive of how you're trying to make the world a better place, and your own way in which you live to achieve that drive. That's what it is to have your own type of love and wisdom. M says, why should there be death? Why is death so important that even Jesus had to die and then resurrect? Yeah, it's built into the system. So, man, I had it all together on why Jesus had to go through the same process that we did. But I still don't have it like all. I won't say that. I'll say why should there be death? It's just how you could think of it as a transition. He says death is nothing but a transition, and transitions are how things grow. Seeds start out as a little thing surrounded by a shell, and there's a distinct change in phase when that little seed and the little shell that keeps it safe and its contents ready to bloom, when it hits the ground and when it gets warm enough and when it's wet enough and bright enough, it splits open and a shoot comes out. There's a whole new phase that comes in and it bursts above ground and does it. That just like we develop in a womb because we need to be in this space that we're suspended in fluid, we've got the mother's immune system protecting us, all these things around, because we need to develop that much, then we get born. There's a huge change in phase when we get born and we're suddenly out exposed to the elements in our own world. Death is a transition like that. It goes from one stage into the stage that builds on it, because the two have very different environments. Death didn't used to be as grotesque and tragic as it is now. It used to be that people knew when they were going to die. In the ideal state, which hopefully we return to, they knew when they were going to die. People regularly talked to angels and spirits, so you knew about the spiritual world, you knew where you were going, and afterwards you could talk to your loved ones who you'd left behind, and people passed at an old age in a peaceful sleep. So death as we know it now doesn't need to be there like that. Angels don't think at all about death. They just think of transition. And hopefully we get back to a place where the bridge between the two worlds is restored, so that it seems like it's not an unknown thing. We don't know, are they still there or not? And where you get it so that we're enough in line that there's not, hell's not causing all these tragedies to happen in the world. Cool. Michael Hoffman said the older videos are great stuff. They are. As I said, we're working on some stuff that's like the older videos. I told you, Heaven Lab is coming up, and like I said, we're making a program in it right now about why does God allow evil. So long form is coming back. We're just perfecting it. Cool. Thank you, everyone. This has been great. If I didn't get to your questions, I'm sorry. I'm like rolling through here. It jumps around. Michael Hoffman, you asked about the Daughters of Zion. Man, I don't know what the Daughters of Zion. I remember that phrase. I don't read something about good from truth or truth from good. I'll have to look that one up. Could you ask that? Can you put that in the comments? Because after this thing posts, like not in this chat, I'm about to be done. Put it in the comments, and then we can look it up and get back to you. Anyone else who I missed your questions, do the same thing. If you're watching after the fact, write questions there. We've got tons of cool people that know all kinds of stuff about Swedenborg, plenty that know a lot that I don't know, who can get in there, and we want to give you any information you're looking for. So thanks, everybody. Hey, if you're enjoying this, go to offtheLefteye.com/donate. We're a not-for-profit, so the only way we can do this programming, but also the translation and publication that we do and everything, is because of donations. So if you feel like what we're doing is helpful to the world and you want to get it out, help get it out to the next person, offtheLefteye.com/donate. Thanks for Wednesdaying, everyone. I'll see you soon.